The studio lights burned bright, illuminating the glossy stage where America's most-watched talk show was about to begin. The crowd murmured in anticipation, some checking their phones, others whispering about tonight's guest. At the center of it all sat Mark Ellison, black, brilliant, and the CEO of one of the most successful tech companies in the world. He adjusted his tailored navy blue suit and kept a composed expression, though he knew exactly what kind of show he had walked into. Across from him, seated comfortably in a leather chair, was Roger Dempsey, a longtime talk show host known for his controversial remarks and thinly veiled biases. Roger had built a career on stirring the pot, challenging guests in ways that often crossed the line between journalism and provocation. And tonight, Mark knew he was in for a spectacle. Roger flashed his signature smirk as he leaned forward. Well, we finally have you here, Mr. Ellison. A self-made billionaire, one of the few black men to ever reach your level. Tell me, how does it feel knowing most people believe you got there because of diversity quotas rather than merit? A murmur rippled through the audience, half intrigued, half appalled. The words had been spoken casually, but the insult was sharp. Mark didn't flinch. He had expected something like this. He leaned back, his dark brown eyes calm but piercing. You're assuming people think that, Roger. Or is that what you think? Roger let out a forced chuckle, shifting in his seat. Come on now, Mark. Let's be honest here. The world of tech is cutthroat. But some doors open a little easier when companies are trying to look inclusive, don't they? Mark didn't blink. He had spent years in boardrooms filled with men who had doubted him before even shaking his hand. He had walked into meetings where executives mistook him for an assistant. And yet, here he was, the head of a multi-billion-dollar empire, sitting across from a man trying to belittle his journey. You know what's funny, Roger? Mark said smoothly, his voice steady. You talk about doors opening easier. But for men like me, those doors weren't just closed. They were locked, barricaded, and guarded by people like you. I had to break them down. The audience erupted in murmurs, a few scattered claps from those who understood what he meant. Roger's smirk faltered for a second, but he quickly recovered. Oh, come on. You're telling me that in today's America, a talented black man doesn't have an advantage? People are practically begging to hire CEOs like you. Mark let the silence stretch, making Roger squirm just a little before he spoke again. You assume the world hands out success based on skin color. Let me tell you a story, Roger. He adjusted his watch, glancing at the host with an intensity that silenced the room. When I was fresh out of college, I applied for a position at a major tech firm. I had the highest scores, the best recommendations. You know what the hiring manager told me? That I'd fit better in a different department, one that wasn't on the leadership track. So, I started my own company. I built it from nothing. No handouts. No shortcuts. The audience was captivated. Even Roger seemed unsure of how to respond. Mark continued, his voice unwavering. People love to rewrite success stories. They hate admitting that some of us had to fight twice as hard just to get a seat at the table. So let me ask you something, Roger. How many CEOs have sat in this chair, and how many of them had to justify their success the way I am right now? Silence. Thick and heavy. Roger shifted, glancing at the teleprompter, but no script could save him from the uncomfortable truth. Then, Mark leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice just enough to make the moment personal. America loves to believe it's past racism, but conversations like this prove otherwise. The fact that you feel comfortable questioning if I deserve to be here says more about this country than it does about me. The crowd erupted in applause. Some people stood. Others simply stared, stunned by the weight of his words. Even the camera crew hesitated before cutting to commercial. And in that moment, as the screen faded to black, America realized it had just witnessed something unforgettable. The cameras went dark and the show cut to commercial. Roger Dempsey sat stiffly in his chair, gripping the edge of his desk. His forced smile wavered, and for the first time in years, he looked uneasy on his own stage. Mark Ellison, on the other hand, remained perfectly composed. He took a sip from the water glass on the table, his eyes steady as he watched Roger. The murmur of the live audience still buzzed in the background. Some were whispering, others were typing away on their phones, no doubt spreading the moment across social media before the show even resumed. One of the producers, a woman with a headset and clipboard, rushed up to Roger, whispering something in his ear. He nodded, face flushed, before turning back to Mark. The cameras were about to roll again, and Roger knew he had lost control of the conversation. The stage lights flickered back on. The applause sign flashed, but this time, the cheers were more genuine. Mark had just done something unexpected. He had flipped the script on Roger, and the audience loved it. Roger cleared his throat as the camera zoomed in on him. Welcome back, folks. If you're just tuning in, we have Mark Ellison, billionaire CEO, here with us tonight. And let's just say, things got interesting before the break. A few chuckles spread through the crowd. Mark simply smiled, adjusting his cufflinks. Roger shifted in his seat. He wasn't used to losing control of the narrative. Mark, you've built an impressive empire. There's no denying that. But let's get real here. Don't you think people are a little tired of the race card being played in every discussion? I mean, people don't care what color you are. They care about results. Isn't that what really matters? Mark exhaled through his nose, shaking his head slightly. You're asking the wrong question, Roger. Oh, and what's the right question? Mark turned slightly, making sure to look directly into the camera. The right question is, why is it that every time a black man achieves success, someone like you tries to downplay how hard it was to get there? The audience let out a collective gasp. Roger's jaw tightened. Mark wasn't just answering questions. He was exposing a mindset, live on air. Let me be clear, Mark continued. I don't walk into rooms expecting to talk about race. I walk in expecting to talk about business, innovation, leadership. But you made this about race the moment I sat down. And now you're asking why it's a conversation. Roger opened his mouth, but Mark wasn't finished. He turned his attention back to the audience. The truth is, people like Roger don't want to talk about how America really works. They want to pretend we all start from the same place. That it's just hard work that gets you to the top. But if that were true, Roger, why do people like me have to answer questions about how we got here while people like you never do? Roger's fingers curled against his desk. The air in the room felt thick, like the weight of Mark's words had settled onto everyone's shoulders. Mark let the silence sit for a moment before he delivered the final blow. America loves to pretend it's colorblind, but the only people who say that are the ones who never had to fight for a seat at the table. The crowd erupted again, this time louder. People clapped, some even stood. Roger glanced at his producers in a panic, but they knew this was TV gold. The moment was already going viral that Roger's show had always thrived on controversy, but this time, he wasn't in control of the controversy. Mark Ellison had just flipped the entire country's perception of him in one interview. And America was watching. Roger Dempsey shifted in his seat, his carefully curated confidence beginning to crack under the weight of Mark Ellison's words. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every moment. Millions of viewers were watching, some stunned, some thrilled, and others fuming at the sheer audacity of a black man refusing to be cornered. Mark leaned back in his chair, calm and unshaken, as the energy in the studio shifted. He could sense it, the tide was turning. He had been in boardrooms, investment meetings, and high-stakes negotiations where men like Roger tried to undermine him with thinly veiled disrespect. But this time, Mark wasn't bound by corporate etiquette. He wasn't here to appease anyone. Roger cleared his throat, forcing a tight-lipped smile. All right, Mark, you've made your point. But let's be real. America is a country of opportunity. If you work hard enough, if you're smart enough, the system rewards you. So, forgive me for saying this, but isn't this whole race issue just a distraction? The audience murmured. Some nodded in agreement. Others sat in disbelief at Roger's insistence on downplaying everything. Mark took a slow breath before responding. You're absolutely right about one thing. Roger, America is a land of opportunity. But let's not act like that opportunity is distributed equally. Roger scoffed. Oh, come on. You're a billionaire. You're proof that anyone can make it. Mark chuckled softly. Roger, if success were just about talent and hard work, this country would look a lot different. Do you think I'm the only black man who worked hard? Who had the intelligence to build something great? No. The difference is, I had to be twice as good, twice as careful, and twice as patient just to get through doors that others walked through effortlessly. Roger waved a hand dismissively. That's just an opinion. No, that's a fact. Mark's voice was sharp now, cutting through Roger's attempted deflections. Let me ask you something, Roger. If I were white, would you have opened this interview by questioning if I deserved my success? The crowd held its breath. Roger opened his mouth but closed it just as quickly. He didn't have an answer. Mark continued, his tone unwavering. When a white billionaire sits in this chair, you ask about their business strategies, their leadership, their innovations. You don't question their legitimacy. You don't frame their success as a debate. But when it's me, suddenly it's about race. Suddenly it's about quotas. Why is that, Roger? Roger shifted uncomfortably. His years of media experience told him he was losing control. His producers were frantically motioning from behind the cameras, but there was no way to steer this back in his favor. Mark pressed on. I'll tell you why. Because people like you don't actually believe in the meritocracy you preach. You want to believe I got here because of some special treatment, because the alternative, the truth, makes you uncomfortable. The truth is, this system wasn't designed for people like me to succeed. And yet, here I am. Not because of it, but in spite of it. A slow clap started somewhere in the audience. Then another, and another. Within seconds, the entire crowd was applauding. Some were nodding in agreement, others just processing the weight of what had been said. Roger, red-faced and flustered, forced another fake chuckle. Well, Mark, you certainly know how to put on a show. Mark smiled, unbothered. No, Roger. I just know how to tell the truth. The applause grew louder. Roger glanced at the teleprompter, hoping for an escape. But there was none. The cameras were live. Social media was already ablaze, and Mark Ellison had just delivered a moment that America wouldn't forget. The energy in the studio was electric, charged with an intensity that even Roger Dempsey couldn't control. Mark Ellison had turned the interview into something far bigger than just a conversation about success. He had made it a moment of reckoning. Roger's signature smirk had faded. He glanced toward his producers, but there was no script to save him now. The control he had over his own show was slipping, and millions of people were watching it happen in real time. Mark, however, remained poised. He wasn't here for theatrics, and he certainly wasn't here to make Roger comfortable. He adjusted his cufflinks, then looked Roger straight in the eye. You know, Roger, I wasn't surprised when I got the invitation to your show, he said, his voice steady. I knew exactly what I was walking into. But I came anyway because I wanted to show America something. I wanted them to see what success looks like when it doesn't fit their expectations. Roger chuckled nervously. Come on, Mark. You're making it sound like I had some kind of agenda. Mark tilted his head slightly. Didn't you? The audience let out a collective murmur. Roger's lips parted slightly, but no words came. Mark continued, his voice unwavering. I've seen this before. The subtle digs. The loaded questions. The attempt to frame me as different from other CEOs, as if I don't belong in the same category. But here's the thing, Roger. I didn't come here to be put on trial. I came here to remind you that people like me aren't an anomaly. We exist. We thrive. And no amount of uncomfortable questions will change that. The audience erupted in applause. Even some of Roger's usual supporters seemed captivated by Mark's presence, by the raw truth in his words. Roger shifted in his chair, clearly trying to regain control. Well, Mark, you certainly have a way with words. But let's talk about the bigger picture. Do you think conversations like this help racial tensions in America? Or do they just keep us divided? Mark leaned forward slightly. Let me ask you something, Roger. When has silence ever solved a problem? Roger blinked, momentarily caught off guard. I just think that constantly bringing up race is necessary when people pretend it doesn't matter, Mark finished for him. People love to talk about unity, but real unity isn't about ignoring differences. It's about acknowledging them, addressing them, and making sure those differences don't determine who gets a chance at success. The crowd clapped again, louder this time. Roger's face twitched. He was used to controlling the conversation, to leading his guests into traps. But Mark wasn't playing along. And then, Mark delivered the final blow. You asked earlier if this conversation helps America, he said, his voice calm but firm. I think the real question is, why does America get uncomfortable when a black man succeeds on his own terms? The audience erupted. Some people stood up, cheering. Others sat in stunned silence. Roger's face burned red under the bright studio lights. He glanced at the camera, realizing there was no way to spin this moment. This wasn't just an interview anymore. It was history in the making. Roger Dempsey sat frozen, his usual bravado crumbling under the weight of Mark Ellison's words. The studio lights felt hotter than before, and the cameras, those ever-watching eyes, captured every second of his discomfort. Mark, on the other hand, was in complete control. He exuded the confidence of a man who had faced tougher battles, who had walked into rooms filled with men just like Roger and left them questioning everything they thought they knew. The crowd's reaction was still rippling through the studio. Some members of the audience were nodding in agreement, others whispering among themselves, and a few diehard Roger fans sat with stiff expressions, unwilling to acknowledge what they had just witnessed. Roger cleared his throat, grasping for control. "All right, Mark," he said, forcing a smile. "You've certainly given us a lot to think about. But let's step away from the racial angle for a moment. Let's talk about your company." Mark smirked slightly. He knew what this was, an attempt to pivot, to move away from the uncomfortable truths that had just been laid bare. He decided to let Roger have this one. "For now, sure," Mark said smoothly. "Let's talk about it." Roger nodded, relieved to regain some footing. "You built one of the most successful tech companies in America from the ground up. Tell us, what was the turning point? When did you know you had something that could change the industry?" Mark leaned back, considering the question. "The turning point wasn't a single moment," he said. "It was every moment I was told, no. Every investor who dismissed me before hearing my pitch. Every executive who questioned my leadership. Every competitor who underestimated me. That's what built this company, resilience. The refusal to let anyone else define my limits." A few people in the audience clapped. Mark could see that some were still absorbing his words, processing the reality of what it meant to be a black man at the top of an industry that had never been designed for him. Roger, sensing that the conversation was moving back into safer territory, pressed forward. "And now that you've built this empire, what's next? What's your vision for the future?" Mark smiled. "My vision? To make sure that the next generation of black entrepreneurs don't have to fight the same battles I did. To create opportunities where they don't have to justify their place at the table. They'll already own the table." The audience erupted again, but this time, it wasn't just applause. It was something deeper and understanding. A shift. Roger plastered on his best professional smile, but deep down, he knew what had just happened. Mark hadn't just given a good interview. He had changed the conversation, and by the time the cameras cut and the show ended, America wasn't talking about Roger Dempsey's questions. They were talking about Mark Ellison's answers. The show had ended, but the moment was far from over. Backstage, Roger Dempsey stormed past his producers, his usual smug confidence replaced with frustration. His grip tightened around the notes he had barely used, crumpling the pages as he muttered under his breath. For years, he had been the one setting the tone, steering conversations however he pleased. Tonight had been different. Mark Ellison had walked into his studio and flipped the entire dynamic on its head. And Roger could feel it. Outside, in the green room, Mark sat relaxed, sipping a bottle of water as his assistant, Jordan, scrolled through his phone. Jordan's eyes widened as he turned the screen toward Mark. "Boss," Jordan said, barely containing his excitement. "It's blowing up. Your interview is everywhere." Mark took the phone and scanned the trending topics. Hashtag Mark Ellison unfiltered, hashtag Roger Dempsey exposed, hashtag Black Excellence. Social media was on fire. Clips from the interview were spreading across platforms at an unstoppable pace. Thousands of tweets praised Mark for standing his ground. Others called out Roger for his outdated mindset, questioning why his show even had the platform it did. Mark smirked. "Right on schedule." Jordan grinned. "I don't think Roger was expecting that kind of pushback." Mark chuckled. "He underestimated me. He thought I'd come on, be polite, dodge his questions, and play along. He didn't realize that I don't need his approval. I never did." A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. A young intern peeked in hesitantly. Mr. Ellison? Roger wants to see you before you leave." Jordan raised an eyebrow. "Think he wants a rematch?" Mark set the water bottle down and stood up, straightening his suit jacket. "Let's find out." Roger was pacing when Mark walked into the room. The host turned sharply, his expression unreadable. "Hell of a show," Roger said, his voice tight. Mark simply nodded. "It was." Roger studied him for a moment, then exhaled sharply. "You know, I've done this for a long time. I've had politicians, CEOs, celebrities, all kinds of people sit in that chair. But I have to hand it to you. You knew exactly what you were doing." Mark crossed his arms. "And what was that, Roger?" Roger smirked, but there was no humor in it. "You didn't just answer my questions. You took control. You turned it into a statement. And now the whole country is talking about you." Mark met his gaze evenly. "They were already talking, Roger. You just gave them a microphone." Roger shook his head, chuckling bitterly. "You're something else, Ellison." He paused, then added, "I'll be honest, I didn't expect you to come out of this looking like the hero." Mark smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. That's because you assumed I'd play by your rules. Roger exhaled through his nose, shaking his head. You think you won, don't you? Mark didn't hesitate. I didn't come here to win. I came here to be heard. Roger held his gaze for a moment, then turned away, staring at the floor as if processing something. He had spent years crafting narratives, twisting conversations, and pushing his own agenda. But for the first time in a long time, he had been outmaneuvered. And he knew it. Mark clapped a hand on Roger's shoulder, firm, but not aggressive. I'm sure we'll be seeing each other again, he said before heading for the door. Roger didn't respond. He just stood there, staring at the space where Mark had been, knowing that the world had just changed and that he, for once, wasn't the one leading the conversation. Outside, Mark and Jordan stepped into their car, the city lights flickering around them. Jordan checked his phone again, shaking his head in amazement. CNN, MSNBC, even some conservative outlets. They're all covering it. Mark leaned back in his seat. He wasn't surprised. This was never just about Roger. This was about something bigger, and now the entire nation was watching. The car rolled smoothly through the city streets, the glow of billboards and neon signs casting fleeting colors across the tinted windows. Mark Ellison sat in the back seat, scrolling through his phone, watching in real time as the country reacted to his interview. Every major news outlet had picked it up. The headlines were blazing across the internet. Mark Ellison schools Roger Dempsey in a heated interview. Talk show host humiliated after trying to undermine Black CEO. Mark Ellison just changed the conversation on race and success in America. Jordan, sitting beside him, let out a low whistle as he scanned through Twitter. Boss, this is next level. Celebrities, politicians, even athletes are talking about it. LeBron just tweeted, Mark Ellison, that's how you handle fools. Clapping hands medium dark skin own, clapping hands medium dark skin own, Mark smirked. LeBron? Huh? Guess that means I did something right. Jordan kept scrolling. Oh, and look at this. Roger's own sponsors are feeling the heat. One of them just released a statement saying they don't support divisive rhetoric. Mark raised an eyebrow. That was interesting. So, they're distancing themselves from him already? Jordan nodded. Looks like it. And check this out, people are calling for his show to be canceled. Hashtag drop Dempsey is trending. Mark exhaled, rubbing his chin. He had expected backlash, but this was bigger than he'd anticipated. He had walked into Roger's arena and flipped the entire script. The country wasn't just reacting, they were demanding accountability. Think they'll actually drop him? Jordan asked. Mark thought for a moment. Depends. If advertisers start pulling out, the network won't hesitate to cut him loose. They'll protect their money before they protect their host. Jordan smirked. Karma works fast. Mark chuckled, but didn't gloat. This wasn't about Roger. It never was. The car slowed as they approached Mark's penthouse, the sleek high-rise standing tall against the night sky. As they pulled into the underground garage, Jordan's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and froze. Boss, you're not gonna believe this, Jordan said, handing Mark the phone. Mark took it and read the message. From unknown number, I saw your interview. We need to talk. Urgent. Call me. There was no name, but Mark recognized the number immediately. It belonged to Senator Alan Whitmore, one of the most powerful men in Washington. Mark's jaw tightened. This just got even bigger. He handed the phone back to Jordan, exhaling slowly. Looks like this conversation isn't over. Jordan grinned. Guess not. Mark glanced out the window at the towering skyline, knowing that whatever was coming next would be even bigger than the storm he had already unleashed, and he was ready. Mark Ellison stared at the message for a long moment, his mind racing. Senator Alan Whitmore was no ordinary politician. He was a kingmaker, a man whose influence stretched deep into Washington. If he was reaching out, it meant only one thing. This wasn't just a viral moment anymore. It was a political firestorm. Jordan watched him closely. You think this is good news or bad news? Mark finally exhaled, slipping the phone into his pocket. With politicians? It's never just one or the other. Jordan smirked. So, are you going to call him? Mark didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped out of the car, heading toward the private elevator that led to his penthouse. Jordan followed, still glued to his phone, scrolling through the endless stream of reactions. As the elevator doors slid shut, Mark pulled out his phone and finally dialed the number. The line barely rang before Whitmore picked up. Mark, the senator said. His voice calm, controlled. I was hoping you'd call. Mark leaned against the elevator wall, arms crossed. You don't strike me as someone who watches late-night talk shows, Senator. Whitmore chuckled. I don't. but I do keep track of conversations that shift the national landscape. And right now, that conversation is you." Mark's expression didn't change. He had been in rooms with men like Whitmore before, powerful, calculating, always 3 steps ahead. He wasn't about to be caught off guard. "So, tell me," Mark said, "what exactly is so urgent?" A brief pause. Then Whitmore's voice lowered slightly. "You just did something I've never seen before. You walked onto Roger Dempsey's show and turned him into the fool. You controlled the entire narrative. Now, half the country is calling you the future of black leadership, and the other half is scrambling to discredit you." Mark exhaled through his nose. "I didn't do it for a title." "I know that," Whitmore said smoothly, "which is exactly why people are paying attention." The elevator doors opened, leading directly into Mark's penthouse. He stepped inside, flipping on the lights as Jordan settled onto the couch, still monitoring social media. Mark paced toward the floor-to-ceiling windows, gazing at the city lights. "Let's cut to it, Senator. What do you want?" Whitmore sighed. "I think you already know. I want you in Washington." Mark smirked. "Last I checked, I run a tech empire, not a political campaign." "Maybe," Whitmore replied. "But you've just proven that you have something rare, an ability to control the national conversation. That kind of power is worth more than any company." Mark turned away from the window. "You're not suggesting I am," Whitmore interrupted. "I want you to think about what comes next, Mark. You've already made your mark in business. Maybe it's time to make your mark on something bigger." Mark let the words sink in. He had spent his whole career focused on building his company, proving that a black man could rise to the highest levels of corporate America. But politics? That was a whole different battlefield. And yet, he had never backed down from a challenge before. Whitmore's voice cut through his thoughts. "Think about it. This moment is bigger than just you. The country needs new leadership, real leadership. And after tonight, millions of people are looking at you as exactly that." Mark remained silent. He wasn't the type to make snap decisions, especially not one this big. "I'll be in New York next week," Whitmore added. "Let's talk in person." Then the line went dead. Mark slowly lowered the phone. Jordan, who had been listening in from across the room, finally spoke. "Holy shit," he muttered. "Are we about to run for office?" Mark didn't answer right away. He just stared out at the city skyline, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. If he stepped into this world, there was no turning back. And yet, as he thought about everything he had fought for, everything he had built, one thought settled in his mind. Maybe this was where he was always meant to be. The city skyline stretched before Mark, glittering with endless possibilities. But for the first time in his life, he wasn't thinking about business deals, market shares, or billion-dollar acquisitions. He was thinking about something bigger, something he had never seriously considered before: politics. Jordan sat on the couch, still staring at him in disbelief. "Boss, you can't just drop a bombshell like that and leave me hanging. Are you actually thinking about this?" Mark turned from the window, his expression unreadable. "I don't know yet." Jordan let out a low whistle. "Man, I was joking. You're seriously considering this, aren't you?" Mark walked over to the sleek bar in the corner of his penthouse, pouring himself a glass of whiskey. He took a sip, letting the warmth settle before answering. "I built a company from the ground up because I wanted to prove that success wasn't just for a select few. But no matter how much money I make, no matter how high I climb, people like Roger Dempsey will always question if I belong." Jordan folded his arms. "So, what? You're gonna run for office just to prove a point?" Mark shook his head. "Not to prove a point. To change the game." Jordan studied him for a moment, then sighed. "All right, let's say you do this. Do you have any idea what you'd be walking into? Business is cutthroat, but politics? That's a different beast. They'll dig up everything. They'll twist every word. And let's be real, Mark, there are people in power who don't want a black man like you even thinking about running." Mark nodded slowly. "I know." Jordan leaned forward. "And do you know what happens when you threaten the system? They come for you. Not just you, your company, your family, everything. You sure you're ready for that?" Mark took another sip of his drink, letting Jordan's words settle. He wasn't naive. He knew the moment he stepped into that world, everything he had built would be under attack. They would paint him as a radical, a fraud, a puppet, anything to keep him out. But then he thought back to that moment on Roger Dempsey's show. The way the audience had reacted. The way the country was reacting now. People were tired. They wanted something different. And maybe, just maybe, Mark was the person who could give it to them. His phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. Another powerful name. This time, it was an invitation. A private gathering in Washington. The kind of meeting that only happened behind closed doors. Mark stared at the screen, his decision becoming clearer by the second. He exhaled and turned to Jordan. Looks like we're taking a trip to DC. Jordan chuckled, shaking his head. Guess I better buy a suit. As the city lights flickered outside, Mark Ellison knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just a conversation anymore. This was the beginning of something much bigger, and the world wasn't ready for what was coming next. The private jet hummed steadily as it cut through the night sky. Bound for Washington, D.C., Mark sat in one of the leather seats, staring out at the endless darkness. His mind wasn't on the luxury of the flight or the exclusivity of the meeting ahead. It was on the weight of the decision he was about to make. Jordan sat across from him, reviewing notes on his tablet. All right, so let's go over what we know. This meeting is hush-hush. No media, no public announcements. Just a room full of powerful people who want to see if you're worth backing. Mark nodded, taking a slow breath. And if they decide I'm not? Jordan smirked. Then you run without them. Mark chuckled, but there was truth in Jordan's words. He had built his empire without permission. If he chose this path, he wouldn't wait for someone to clear the way. The pilot's voice crackled through the speakers. We'll be landing shortly, Mr. Ellison. Mark sat up straight, adjusting his suit. Let's see what DC has to offer. The meeting was held in an upscale, private club, one of those old money institutions where decisions were made long before the public ever heard about them. Mark and Jordan were led into a dimly lit lounge where a small group of men and women sat around a polished mahogany table. These weren't just politicians, they were power brokers, the kind of people who made and broke careers. Senator Alan Whitmore stood and extended his hand. Mark, glad you could make it. Mark shook his hand firmly. Thanks for the invitation. Whitmore gestured toward an empty chair. Have a seat. Let's talk about the future. Mark sat down, scanning the faces in the room. Some looked intrigued, others skeptical. One older man, a former governor, leaned forward. Let's get straight to it. Why would a billionaire CEO want to step into politics? You already have power. Mark met his gaze evenly. Power in business is one thing. Power to change the system is another. A woman with sharp eyes and a calculating expression tapped her manicured nails against the table. You realize that if you do this, you'll be stepping into a war zone. The attacks will be brutal. You'll be painted as everything from a radical to a puppet. Mark smirked. Let them paint. I built my success by proving people wrong. Whitmore nodded approvingly. The question is, how far are you willing to go? Silence hung in the air. This was the moment. The decision. Mark leaned forward. If I do this, I do it on my terms. No playing safe. No avoiding hard conversations. I won't be the token black candidate, and I won't be a puppet for anyone's agenda. The room stayed quiet for a beat. Then, one by one, the heads at the table nodded. Whitmore smiled. Then let's get to work. As Mark shook hands with the most powerful people in the room, he knew his life was about to change forever. This wasn't just an idea anymore. It was a movement, and there was no turning back. The meeting wrapped up after 2 hours of intense discussion, strategy talk, and power plays disguised as polite conversation. As Mark and Jordan walked out into the crisp DC air, the weight of what had just happened settled in. Jordan shoved his hands into his coat pockets. So, that just happened. Mark exhaled, his breath visible in the cold night. Yeah, they're serious about this. And now, so are you. Mark didn't respond right away. Instead, he looked up at the Capitol building in the distance, its white dome glowing under the floodlights. He had spent his entire career fighting to be heard, to be respected, to break through walls built to keep people like him out. And now, he wasn't just knocking on the door. He was about to kick it wide open. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, Mark finally said. There's still a lot to figure out. Jordan smirked. Like what? Your campaign slogan? Mark shook his head with a chuckle. Like whether I'm willing to give up everything I've built for this fight. Jordan's expression turned serious. You knew what you were stepping into the moment you got on that plane. Mark ran a hand down his face. Yeah, I did. Jordan pulled out his phone. Well, if you need more convincing, look at this. Mark took the phone and scrolled through the news. Every major outlet was still running stories on his interview with Roger Dempsey. Pundits were debating whether he was the future of black leadership in America. Some called him inspiring. Others called him dangerous. And then, there was a headline that made him pause. Conservative groups target Mark Ellison. He's a threat to our way of life. Jordan nodded grimly. Told you. They're already coming for you. Mark clenched his jaw. He had known this would happen. He had prepared for it. But seeing the opposition mobilizing so quickly was still jarring. Jordan took his phone back. "So, what's the move?" Mark turned toward their waiting car, opening the door. "We start building the team." Jordan grinned. "That means you're in." Mark slid into the back seat, his mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. "I guess I am." As the car pulled away, Mark stared out at the DC skyline, knowing that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but that had never stopped him before, and it sure as hell wasn't going to stop him now. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Mark's name dominated the news cycle. The interview with Roger Dempsey had been just the beginning. Now, every major outlet wanted a piece of him. Some painted him as a visionary leader, a fresh force in politics. Others twisted his words, calling him dangerous, ungrateful, even un-American. Mark didn't care. He had spent his entire life fighting against expectations, and this was just another battlefield. With Vanessa Carter running his campaign, things moved fast. She secured key endorsements, built a grassroots movement, and crafted a message that resonated across racial and economic lines. It wasn't just about Mark being a black billionaire running for office. It was about what he represented. A man who had beaten the system and now wanted to change it. But with momentum came opposition. The attacks grew vicious. Old business rivals leaked false accusations. Conservative networks ran hit pieces, calling him an elitist who had forgotten where he came from. Even Roger Dempsey, desperate to regain relevance, hosted panel after panel questioning Mark's integrity. None of it worked, because Mark refused to play their game. He wasn't running from his past, he was owning it. He took control of his narrative, speaking directly to the people in live-stream town halls, social media Q&As, and packed rallies. He bypassed traditional media and built a movement that couldn't be ignored. Then came the defining moment that a televised debate, his first real test on the national stage. His opponent, Senator Charles Whitman, was a seasoned politician with decades of experience. He stood on stage, smirking as if Mark didn't belong there. "This country doesn't need corporate billionaires trying to buy their way into power," Whitman said, voice dripping with condescension. "We need leaders with experience." Mark adjusted his microphone and smiled. "Experience?" He let the word hang in the air. "You've been in office for 30 years, Senator. 30 years of speeches. 30 years of promises. And yet, America is still waiting for the change you keep talking about." The audience erupted in applause. Mark continued, his voice steady, unwavering. "I didn't come from money. I didn't inherit power. I built something. I created jobs. I fought through a system designed to keep people like me out, and I won. Now, I'm here because I refuse to let the next generation fight the same battles alone." That moment went viral. It wasn't just a soundbite. It was a movement, and when the debate ended, the polls made one thing clear. Mark Ellison wasn't just a contender, he was the future. Election night came faster than anyone expected. The country was divided, but something had shifted. For the first time, people saw a candidate who wasn't just another politician. He was one of them. As the final results rolled in, Mark stood in his campaign headquarters, surrounded by his team, watching history unfold. The numbers flashed on the screen that he had won. The room erupted. Cheers, shouts, tears of disbelief. Vanessa shook his hand. Jordan hugged him, and cameras captured the moment that would be replayed for decades. Mark Ellison had done the unthinkable. He had walked into a system designed to keep him out and taken the highest seat at the table. As he stepped onto the stage that night, looking out over the thousands gathered to witness history, he took a deep breath and spoke the words that would be remembered forever. "America, this is just the beginning. The end